Hello, thank you so much for checking out another video. Today I'm going to be doing kind of a high-level overview of what a mitigation specialist kind of process on a case actually looks like from start to finish, so that anyone new to the idea of a mitigator can kind of have an idea of not just what we do in the broad sense, but kind of how we develop the client's life history and find the background information. So that's what we're going to focus on today, and I still hope it'll be helpful for people who aren't necessarily mitigation specialists or interested in this job as a career, but I hope I can throw in some nuggets that you might find useful in your own life or profession. So thank you again. So I've got a nice visual for you all today, and I'm just going to kind of go through it, talk through it. So the very first thing to get a case started is typically I get a call from an attorney who thinks that they have a good client for a mitigator. So they've kind of identified maybe a mental health issue or a lot of trauma. Maybe the client said they were in CPS care or foster care. Maybe they have um, a physical disease or medical issue that they just identified kind of right off the bat that they need a specialist to come in for. I really love when attorneys contact me as soon as possible. A lot of my clients I get after they've already pled guilty. And of course, we could talk about this all day, but there's a lot of reasons why people plead guilty besides actually being guilty. Put a pin in that. But when a client has already pled guilty, it does limit a little bit what I'm able to help with, but I'm still happy to take those cases. It just means that my kind of final product, my work, won't be used in plea negotiations. Since that part has already been done, it'll be used for something else, typically sentencing. Contacted by the attorney, I usually have an initial meeting with them over the phone or in person, and they give me a little bit of information about the case, but not a lot. And I'll sometimes be given access to what's called discovery, so kind of the evidence gathered against the client, or I'll be given access to some of the case records. And I do look at those, but I look at them kind of briefly and without getting too attached to the details beyond kind of just the main facts or anything that jumps out at me that I want to talk to the client about right away. Otherwise, I like to go into my first client interview sort of with a blank slate so that I can not go in with preconceived notions about the offense and who this person must be because they committed this type of offense, what kind of person they are. I really want to go into my first interview, especially knowing very little so that I can hear it from the client first. And it's not really my place to make judgments, but to kind of learn their story from them and not from the police. So that's why I do a limited amount of research up front. I go through the first client interview. So as you can see, the first steps, I kind of count that as the first client interview. So when I'm going to that first interview, my goals are to meet the client and get to know them. This is also kind of known as the part where you're building rapport. I'll talk about that in a second. I'm also bringing record releases with me. I'll take a general HIPAA release. I take a general Medicaid release, a general Texas Education Agency release, and if I see anything in their file about military service or CPS or anything specific that I know I'll need a release for, I'm bringing that as well. And I can at least get the client to sign those, and I can get started on requesting records that I know pretty much every client will need. Also, in that first interview, besides getting the record releases signed, I want to start compiling a list of people that I'm going to reach out to who played an important role in the client's life. So that's going to look like family members, best friends, mentors like coaches or somebody from church or a neighbor, teachers. And so I want to kind of start compiling a list of people that I know I'm probably going to reach out to at some point. So that's what I want to kind of walk away with. And I'm going to talk about building rapport for a minute because in my line of work, sorry, that's my dog. We put a lot of emphasis on the idea of building rapport, and I almost want to push back on that idea a little bit And here's why. I think people can see through that when it's not genuine, and I don't think it's helpful. So I think it's really, really helpful um, to show genuine interest in your client by walking into an interview, making them feel safe and comfortable by saying what your role is, who you are. And then I typically like to ask, how are you? How are you really? And then I'm immediately listening to them. I'm not talking to them about the latest Cowboys game. I'm not talking to them about, oh, you have two siblings? Oh, I have two siblings. Like I'm not I don't find a lot of the way they teach building rapport to be particularly helpful. So kind of to each his own. But I will say something that you can take away maybe to a different job is one of my brothers is a doctor. And when he was in medical school or probably residency, he told me that he had like a practical exam and he had to evaluate a patient. And after the patient exam, the evaluator was kind of giving him feedback. And the evaluator told my brother that he was the only doctor who had asked the patient how they were. I guess everyone else had just kind of jumped in. And so that really stuck with me. And I know it depends on what your career is, but just stopping to take that time to actually check in with a human being before you start doing what's on your agenda, I think in my profession, and it seems like in my brother's, I think that can go a really long way. So just throwing that out there. Okay. Um, so I do want to go deeper into all these steps, but just for the sake of keeping the videos kind of under 10 minutes, I'm going to move on to the next one, but I will do another video going deeper into the first client interview because I think it would be really helpful. So after you've done that first interview, what you walk away from there with is your notes from the interview, which you need to very quickly turn into a memorandum and send that to the attorney. I like to give myself 48 hours to do that. And that's actually pretty bold because my first interview notes especially are usually like 30 written pages long. So that's actually a lot to like write out and put in memo form and then kind of break down into themes and make it helpful for the attorney. So I give myself 48 hours to do that. What we also walk away from is having those record releases. So you can start requesting records right away, which is really important because some of them take a really long time. And you don't necessarily know which ones will be quick and which ones will take forever and that you'll need to follow up with multiple times or that you'll need to fight with or get a different release for, or whatever the case may be, you want to get started on requesting those records as early as possible. The other thing that you've walked away with is that list of people who you're going to reach out to. And so you want to start making a record log so that you can have in one convenient place people with their contact information, who they are, and you can keep track of who you've reached out to. And then when you have other people on the team, like the fact investigator or the attorneys being like, hey, can you send me so-and-so's number? You can always find it really quickly. The other thing that you'll want to start working on after the first interview is another what's called master doc, and that is a chronology or a life timeline. So from that first interview, the client's going to be throwing out dates and events, and you'll now be able to track those, and you'll have that all in one place so that you can start recognizing patterns and fluctuations in the client's story. Sometimes they're really obvious and really helpful. For example, I had a client a while back, and his mother, I think, was arrested all the time. And it was almost like clockwork. She would get arrested, he would have a juvenile arrest. She would get arrested, he would get an in school suspension. I mean, it was just so clear when you look at it like that. Nobody had taken the time to do that. And so that's a big part of explaining who our client is. So the record log, the master timeline, and the master people list, those are all some of the main documents that will always be growing and being added to throughout the case. And then those will help shape your final product, or however you kind of, whatever the attorney needs from you at the end of the case, which we'll talk about. Okay, so then you're probably ready for the second client interview, which happens pretty quickly after the first one because there's no way you got all the information in the first one. And so in that second interview, you are discussing follow up questions that you have, gaps in the story, things you didn't get to. They'll have remembered things they want to talk about. Um, you've maybe received some records back, so you can ask questions from the records. You've maybe done a couple of family or friend interviews, and so maybe you want to follow up on something there. And so you have a lot that you still need to go through on that second client interview. And again, you walk away from that probably with more specific releases of places you need to reach out to get records. You probably have more things to add to the timeline and the people list and the record log. And now you're cooking, you're working the case up, you're figuring out what paths you want to follow and kind of what themes you want to keep looking into and building upon. Around this time, you also want to be thinking about if you need to suggest that the defense team get any other experts. So, depending on the client, you may need to get a psychologist, a neuropsychologist, a war veteran expert, a traumatic brain injury expert. Whatever the circumstances of the case may be, you may want to bring somebody else on board to help explain some facet of the client's life that you're not an expert in. And so making those suggestions to the attorney as early as possible, again, can be helpful. And so obviously the mitigation investigation, there's a lot that goes into it, but those are kind of the steps that you're going to go through. And then once you kind of have everything gathered, you've interviewed everyone you could, or you're just out of time, then it's time to put everything together. So, what does that look like? What does a finished product look like? That depends on the case. So, sometimes an attorney will just want a sentencing memorandum. Sometimes they'll just want a mitigation memorandum, or they might just want a sentencing video. You want to know that kind of upfront too. That might change how you do your interviews. Or they could want a mitigation packet. Well, is the packet for plea negotiations, or is it for sentencing? Is it for just for them to have on hand? You just want to figure out what the purpose is so that you can tailor your work towards that. Well, and I guess there's one more thing. You can work with the clients kind of through the end when they're sentenced. And so that might look like you helping them write a statement to the judge, or it could look like if they went to trial and they were found guilty, then in Texas there's a separate sentencing trial essentially. And maybe you can help prep them for what they're going to say during that. That's pretty much the really high level process of a mitigation case from start to finish and some of the major steps that you go through along the way. I will go into everything like going into timelines, going into that first client interview. I want to go into detail for all of those, but I hope that this was helpful for, like I said, for that overview. So thank you so much for watching, and I love questions and comments, and I will try to answer them. And thank you so much. We'll see you next time.